Retro Groove. Enjoy your voyage. Retro Groove. Retro Groove. Retro Groove. Retro Groove.
Howdy and welcome to Retro Groove. I'm Adam C.
And I'm Liam D.
And this is a podcast where we talk about music that stands the test of time, the albums and artists that have shaped and reshaped the sonic landscape, as well as covering new music from those artists. So today, we thought we would take a bite out of a topic that has been tread over so many times in so many different ways by so many different people that I don't know, I almost felt like, what more could we possibly add to the conversation? Why are we even going to attempt doing a Beatles episode?
How did you not take the Apple joke right there?
See,
you said take a bite out of, and then
it was
like,
there.
Oh, here he goes. Dad joke is there. I guess that's probably more elevated.
Well, and then I said the word big, and then like in the back of my brain, as the words were coming out of my mouth, I was like, Big Apple, that's New York, and that has nothing to do with what we're talking about, and that's going to set up a rabbit trail that we don't need to go down because it doesn't help us. So
fair enough.
Anyway, we're getting into semantics here, and it's fun. But yeah, both of us have, over the course of the past couple of weeks, gone through the entirety of Peter Jackson's epic Get Back docu-series, and
very epic.
It's an epic in typical Peter Jackson fashion. It is the director's cut. Let's put it that way.
That's true. Yeah.
We'll get into that, and we'll also just kind of touch on some general Beatles opinions and our thoughts on all things Beatles. But first, as we typically do, Liam, how have you been?
I'm pretty good. I'm right off the heels of a 6-year-old's birthday party at a bowling alley today, which it's been a little while since we did birthday parties, and
right.
pre-COVID, my daughter was 4, and those birthday parties are a little different.
Yes.
I don't know about you. Everybody's situation is obviously a little different. I didn't have a whole lot of cousins or nieces and nephews at all, or friends that had young children where I was going to bowling parties or even like 6, 7, 8-year-old birthday parties in the past, 20 years, like since I was that age.
Right.
So being thrown into that now with a kid that age who is of the birthday party season or scene, it's fun. Like, It was interesting going bowling and showing a bunch of kids how to bowl.
Right.
And like they haven't done it ever, and it's been 2 years since they could go into a bowling alley. So they really had never done it. But what's applicable to this, which is interesting, is like the screens that are over the bowling lanes were playing a mishmash of ads for concessions, as they would.
Oh, wow.
Like a Christmas animated Mickey movie, and music videos. And the music videos were like Britney Spears and Nelly Furtado and then some like more recent stuff. And it was kind of fun because like my daughter knew everything. There were 5 or 6 times during this birthday party where she turned to me and was like, Daddy, this is my favorite song. They're playing my favorite song.
That's
and I'm
great.
like, this is your favorite song? But like, it was kind of fun. Like, no other kids seemed to be jazzed that they were playing Britney Spears or Dua Lipa or whatever it was. And like, she was really vibing it as she was learning to bowl. So it was kind of fun.
Well,
there was
good
an
job,
arcade
Dad.
there. Yeah, right. There was an arcade there. So it was kind of fun to get your hands on a joystick again.
Yeah.
And they had one of those things where you throw the balls at the fuzzy clowns to get tickets.
I like that one.
Man, that felt good.
It does.
It felt good. I could not make a basket in the hoop shot, hot shot, whatever.
No.
Like I stunk. I was really bad, but they didn't know. They were 6, so whatever. They couldn't even reach it. Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. We did a little move, and I've got kind of a new setup going. So that didn't leave a whole lot of time for my normal perusing of my favorite local record stores, or much of anything else besides the whole moving process. But
you got some nice gear there.
Sure. I got.
You were streaming. I can't even stream. I don't even have a laptop that can stream.
Well, I got gear. Oh, I've had the laptop for a long time, but I got gear that was the least expensive I could find that was adequate enough to do what I needed to do reliably. So I'll put it that way.
Nice.
So that was kind of a small early Christmas gift to myself, the interface and the capture box and the microphone stand setup and all of that. So, it was, I chalked it up to a necessity. We're trying to keep things rolling, and I didn't want to lose momentum during the move and things like that. So,
that's great.
Gear is gear, and it's necessary. And if you want to keep it quality, you got to buy quality stuff. And I didn't go overboard. I just got what I felt like we needed. Got the hard drive too, and I'm happy to feel better about the equipment that I do have, just to keep it rolling and keep it quality. Because
well, your appearance on Retro Logic was great and sounded great, and you did your stream. It's one of my favorite Mario games, so that was great.
Yeah.
It feels like you've got a good situation. I love it.
Yeah, we'll keep it rolling, and I'll be streaming some retro games on Sunday nights on the Retro Logic Twitch account. That'll be fun. So of course, now that I have to be even more focused when I go out and about, because I could get lost shopping around for NES games. I could get lost shopping around for records. Thankfully, one of my favorite haunts, Piranha Records in Round Rock, Texas, has both. They sell retro games as well. Yeah. They don't have a big game section. It's kind of an aside to what records are their primary thing, but it's nice to walk in to go browsing for records and be like, oh, they got Mario, or they got whatever Mega Man 4 in, and
it's a good one.
I'm not going to drop the $45 on it, but that's technically a good price. So there's that. But other than the gear, I did, and this is also pretty much the only thing I've been listening to this past entire week. I was listening to the Rick Rubin podcast. Is it called Broken Record?
I think
so. He was talking to, I think it was the Serge Tonkin episode.
Oh, okay.
And at some point they were just talking about like the LA music scene and how exciting things are. And the band Les Butcherettes came up. And I had one of those moments, like the flashback moment in the movies where something triggers and they go back, because I was first introduced to Les Butcherettes when Dan and myself went to go see At the Drive-In in 2017 when they were touring for Inter Alia. Well, okay. They toured with, there's a whole connection there. Yeah. And they toured with Mars Volta, and the lead singer and basically the founder and primary creative force. She's in a band with Omar Rodriguez Lopez, right? Called Bosnian Rainbows, of all things. But
amazing.
Super creative names from that whole crew, and I love it. But yeah, I went to go see At the Drive-In. It was June of 2017 with my brother, and they were the opening act, and I had never heard of them. And I don't know if you know much about them, but
just a little bit, yeah.
But their stage performances are very theatrical. Probably not as much as they were in the very early stages. They're actually from Mexico, so their early shows in Mexico, they would have pigs' heads and fake blood and bloody aprons and things like that. So it's that type of thing. And so their performance completely like caught me off guard, and I loved the music. It checked all of the boxes for me. And of course I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, this is one of my new favorite bands. I can't wait to find out who these people are and dig into their history. And then At the Drive-In came out, and it's At the Drive-In. So I kind of forgot about it for a while. And when I was listening to that, it jogged my memory, and I was like, oh man. So I ended up going back, you do the down the backwards rabbit hole. And I actually purchased they put out an EP last year, and it plays like an album because it's like 7 songs and they're all fantastic. There's no filler. So I ordered that. It's actually on its way to me from Amoeba Records in Hollywood.
Nice.
Which I think will be my first Amoeba purchase.
Okay.
Man, they're rooted in garage rock and punk. But kind of now are a little bit more venturing into sort of a St. Vincent kind of thing. So it's really interesting to go back through their history and watch the evolution happen. And, she is amazing. The lead singer and main songwriter, Teresa Suarez, and she goes by the stage name Terry Genderbender. Yeah. And, the whole thing comes from, speaking out against the gender stereotypes in Mexico. And not that we don't have those here, but primarily, where she came from. And that's where the whole like bloody apron and everything came from.
They're pretty punk rock though, right? Like usually when you think of theatrics, fake blood, you think of Rammstein metal,
right?
Gwar metal, and like this is still rock. It's pretty rocky,
totally.
Right? I'm sure I know a song or two. I can't really think of anything in my head, but I feel like they're more of a punk band to me.
Definitely.
Than metal. Yeah.
And her in particular, it's the way that I think of it. It's like if you took Joan Jett, Iggy Pop, and like Karen O and put them in a blender, you kind of get her sort of vibe. And I'm here for it. We've already established on this podcast that for some reason, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I definitely have some kind of thing for dark-haired, scary front women. Yeah. So it's checking boxes that I didn't even know I had.
That's very funny. Yeah.
Anyway,
this is therapy too. Yeah.
I don't know if you knew that. I've been blasting all of their records, much to my daughter's chagrin, and
awesome.
It's so much fun too. At the same time, their music videos are quite out of this world. So highly recommend them. What about you? What you've been listening to and buying?
Well, so and kind of in keeping with this week's theme, it worked out, but also it was predicated by the conversation we had for the last episode, where I realized that I didn't own a copy of Abbey Road, and as you went through the
recommendations
albums that you would get for anybody who is like just getting into vinyl, I'm like, yeah, I should probably have. I looked and I didn't have that on CD, and so I went out. They put out a nice anniversary edition. It wasn't too expensive. There was also a very expensive version. I figured I was good with this one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, as there always is. So. That's beautiful. That's gorgeous. So that I attribute to you. I also attribute another one of my purchases to your influence on all of this.
Oops.
Because and it actually goes to your conversation a bit during Retrologic, but also just some of the other conversations we've had, especially regarding Spoon and a few others, where you've talked about completing the discography, and it's never been a thing in my head. I've always wanted to have the music that I loved at my fingertips. It was always a matter of wanting to own and pay into, but own the ability or the option to engage with culture. And I still feel that way. But as you've talked about this over these past conversations, I'm like, there are bands where I should just complete the discography. There are some.
Yeah, if it's a band you care about, it feels like you're doing the right thing.
I've probably missed out on some things. And so
yeah, there's that too.
So right now, my headspace now in December of 2021 is that I am going to complete the REM discography.
Yes.
Patchwork of vinyl and CD. So
That's
it's not
okay.
as daunting.
No.
Because I think I have like 6 or 7 albums on CD and 2 or 3 on vinyl. And so, especially with like used CDs, I mean, I literally was at the record store and they had the remaster of Monster, which is an album I love, but like it's not my favorite REM album, for like $28. Or they had the used CD in great condition for $3. And I'm like, I'm
taking
probably
the CD.
So I got the CD.
Nice.
But I am kind of set now. I've like thought about a few other bands that I probably want to complete the discography of, just so I have everything accessible to me. So
awesome.
So REM will be my first.
Well, and that's a good band to do that with, because
I agree. Yeah.
Some bands, it's like, there are bands that I love that there's an album or two or maybe even more that I'm like, I don't need to listen to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but REM is quality all the way through.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and it's made me realize too. I mean, Automatic for the People is probably considered the like touchstone album, but they don't have a Nevermind, right? They don't have that album where it was like, this was the moment, and then there's all these other things on the other albums, but like, this is the one. And so it makes kind of collecting them more interesting, because I know the hits and the singles. I know some off songs that I've just been exposed to here or there, or I've sought out. But listening now to some of these other albums that I've kind of dove into, I'm like, man, this band sounds different. I mean, it's a little bit like the Beatles. Like every song sounds different. It could be a different band. If you didn't recognize the voices, like, it could be a different band, but there's something about the orchestration or like the way that they kind of create their sound that is so unique that you can tell it's REM even if it doesn't sound like REM, and you can tell it's the Beatles even if it doesn't sound like the Beatles.
And the others, adding on top of that, it's really, really fun and interesting to get the whole discography of a band like that has been around for so long and has put music out over multiple decades, that you can watch hear the evolution over time, what they sounded like in the early years, the kind of transitions that they went through, maybe even, members coming in and out, and to be able to see the arc over time is really, really fun and interesting. And I think you can definitely do that with REM, kind of see how they evolved over time with their sound.
Yeah, and I think as weird as it sounds, it also is nice that there's an endpoint too.
Yes.
Like I had that, and this is so unrelated, but I had that with The Walking Dead, the comic series, where I was buying the hardcover books because I loved reading the series, and they just kept coming. And I was like, am I really going to buy one of these every 9-10 months and reread the series every time to get to the 10th or 12th hardcover book? And so initially by like the 10th book, I was like, I'm just going to leave it. I'm going to walk away. And as soon as he's done, then I'll go get everything and I'll just read everything. And 5 years later, all of a sudden, I don't know if you follow comics at all, but it was
not
crazy
much
thing
anymore.
It was a crazy thing that happened. This isn't a comic podcast, but he just ended the series. Like, no one really had a heads up. When you went in to pick up your issue of The Walking Dead that came out that month,
that was it.
It was over.
Wow.
It was just over. And everybody flipped, dude. People were losing their minds because they were like,
Wow.
we didn't have a heads up, and this is the end. And he arced it nicely, and it resolves itself well.
Yeah.
But while everybody was freaking out that like this journey had ended, I was elated because I'm like, oh, I can finally read this whole thing. This is fantastic.
Right.
Like, this is the best thing that's ever happened. And the hardcover came out like a month or two later, and I picked it up and I sat there for like a week or two and I read the whole series. And so I feel like with REM, it's the same thing. Like, I can get everything together and I can have everything.
Yes.
And then I just have
And
everything.
that's it. You're done.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about anything else happening.
It's nice. I can just like mull over it and revisit things, and I don't have to be like, wait, what are they doing now? I don't know about that. It's been 40 years, guys. I think it's fine. Whatever.
That's enough.
But yeah, and then so I crowdsourced a synthwave like Zelda music album, which I've got enough of. Like
excellent.
I've got enough of like the lo-fi stuff and the symphonic stuff where I was like, do I really need a synthwave version? And then I listened to the songs because you get the digital immediately, and then the vinyl is going to come in like 6 months.
If they're lucky.
And yeah, right, exactly. And so I listened to a couple of it, and my daughter was in the room, and she was like, hey, I know that, and she thought it was cool, and I was like, all right, yeah, I'm gonna get this.
Yeah.
And then speaking of my kid, I know I mentioned it during the bowling thing, but like she has been asking for certain songs now. Like, she's got enough of a recollection of random songs that have been on around the house or the car. And so she asked me the other day, she asked me for the Shoe Shine song, which is the Gorillaz. Yeah.
I know what that means.
Yep. And I was like, yeah, okay, we can listen to some Gorillaz. And then I was driving, so I'm like, I can't really be on my phone, so I think we're going to listen to this band a bunch. And we listened to like 10 songs on this drive to and from an errand. And she was way into it, and it was fun kind of explaining to her that they're a cartoon band, and I showed her pictures and videos. And so that was kind of cool. And then the last just fun thing, I missed the cutoff this year, but next year I've told my wife that since it's the three of us, what I want to do for next year's Christmas card is recreate Beastie Boys' Check Your Head album cover as just like our name and then Merry Christmas or whatever. And it's just us kind of looking like sitting on the curb. And my wife was like, we can do that, but that means that you set a precedent. So I hope you have other ideas for like future album covers. Like, you can't just do this as a one-off.
Right.
The next year we'll have to do it again with a different one. And so I was like, man, what trios have iconic album covers that have them on it? Like Green Day does not. ZZ Top does. We could do Beards. But we landed on Destiny's Child, where like there are some great album covers with the three of them on there. And so then we all, like, my daughter knows some Beyonce, but doesn't really know. We realized she doesn't really know Destiny's Child. So we watched the Survivor video. We've been dancing to Bootylicious. It's been great. Like,
that's awesome.
That Destiny's Child had hit after hit, man. Like,
powerhouse.
Beyonce is Beyonce, and the hits are all there too.
Yeah.
But like that Destiny's Child catalog is fire. There's like 10 to 12 just mega hits in that catalog alone. So yeah. So it's been super fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, we do have a little bit of news to touch on before we get into our music history for the week. This is real briefly. I just saw this announcement today, but the Texas trio, speaking of trios, Khruangbin is kind of a jazzy, mostly instrumental, groovy trio. They did a little EP with Leon Bridges a few years back called Texas Sun. And it was very well received. And everyone was like, oh, when are you going to do an album? But then, as the year or two went by, they each kind of put out their own things, and it didn't look like anything else was going to happen or anything was going to come from it. But they just announced they are putting out another EP, not an album, but another small EP called Texas Moon. this time.
Yeah.
And that's going to be out February 18th. So I will absolutely be looking forward to that because I'm a big fan of both of those artists. And that Little
Yeah.
Texas Sun EP is really, really, really amazing.
It's really good, and it seems like this is something that they wanted to do, or at least were obviously inspired to do because of the success of the first one.
Yeah.
And it's kind of fun to think of what this could fully sound like. I like a theme. It doesn't need to be like a full subject album or whatever, but like to have a sort of style or mode of songwriting or something for this could be really cool. Yeah, I'm excited for it too.
Dope.
I mentioned REM is going into their 40th anniversary or their 40th year. So is Metallica. And if you're listening to this now, you may be missing the first stream of their concert, but it's on demand, so don't worry about it. They are doing 2 concerts to celebrate their 40th anniversary. And if you don't have tickets to that, then you can go to Amazon Music, Amazon Prime, any of those Amazon things. You can even watch it on Twitch.
Wow.
They're broadcasting both concerts on there, and then they'll be on demand afterwards on Prime Video. I'm super jazzed for this. I feel like it's going to be just one of those kind of expansive playlists where they go hit after hit, maybe pull out a couple deep ones, but this is a band that they know the fan favorites. They know how to deliver. I'm sure I've said this on the podcast before. Like I've seen them a handful of times, but mainly at music festivals.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see them at a proper, like this is at the Chase Center at San Francisco.
Oh, okay.
I wish I was at a show like that. Like I'd like to go see them at a proper, like full on arena show or even like an amphitheater, but that's never going to happen. But I just think there was such an energy at the shows that I was at where you would think when you're at a metal show, like when I was at that Megadeth show, it was intense. Like people were very cool. The metal fans are
they're
nice
amazing.
and they're like wonderful, very considerate people who just like then spin around and throw fists in the pit.
Of course, but they'll help
they
you
take care
up
of
after.
each other too. Oh yeah, 100%. They're just working it out. But yeah, so Metallica fans though, or a Metallica show is like the pinnacle of that, where it's really just, it felt like everyone was there and everybody, like if there was a communal aspect to every time I've seen them. Mm-hmm. And like a dude put his arm around me and I didn't know who he was. and normally I'd just beeline for the door. I'd rush for the gates.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, I think I'm okay with this actually. Like we're enjoying this
hug
together. Yeah. It was kind of like that. He was like, this is awesome. And I'm like, yeah, it kind of is awesome. So
I'm finding it kind of funny that Metallica was one of the first and, most vocal groups coming out against, Napster.
I didn't even think of that. Yeah.
And now they're streaming it on Amazon.
I'm sure they got a nice big paycheck for it.
Oh, of course. So
Amazon money is good. Napster money's not. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that's what it came down to, but it is funny.
Yeah. We recently got the sad news that Mike Nesmith of the Monkees passed away, natural causes, at the age of 78. Are you a Monkees fan at all? Did you grow up with them?
That's one of those groups that my late great Aunt Sue introduced me to, along with the Beach Boys and the Beatles. And I remember seeing them on TV. I wasn't really into them, but the TV show was entertaining and I would listen to whatever my Aunt Sue liked. So I'm aware of them, but my fandom didn't move much further beyond, the age of 5 or 6.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and I'm a fan. This just like our later Beatles conversation. I could have some of these notes wrong, but like they were obviously put together for this TV show. They weren't musicians in the sense of like a band that had this vision to put out this material and then it coalesced into a TV show. It was kind of the opposite, but they were all very talented in their own right, and ultimately would go on to write and tour and perform their own music, which was great.
Yeah.
But most of their hits, a lot of their hits were written by Neil Diamond, and Neil Diamond is Jewish Elvis. Like he is like. He like that dude is fantastic.
I've never heard him put that way.
That guy can write a hit, man. I mean, like even his bad songs are catchy, and so he wrote a bunch of like I'm a Believer, a bunch of those Monkees smashes were Neil Diamond songs.
Wow.
Mickey Dolenz is the only one left. Transparently, I do have autographs from some artists and stuff like that. The Monkees were artists and a band or a group that I definitely wanted in my career path and whatever to get. Like they meant something to me. I watched the show growing up, and so I have an LP signed by 3 of the 4 members.
Wow.
I met Mike Nesmith twice,
and
both times he refused to sign it.
Oh my goodness!
Because he was such. By the end of his life, he was back in and he was touring with the band. There was a reunion there, but when I met him, he was not working with the Monkees. He was doing his own thing, and so he was very polite about it. But he was like, "Yeah, I don't do that." He definitely, like later on, also was the guy at the conventions where if you paid like $100, like you could get the signature on an item or something. I never did that. That's not my vibe. I more prefer the story that like I have 3 of the 4 autographs and the 4th that I don't have. I was told no.
It's a great story. I mean, multiple times too.
Multiple times. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I got shot down twice. I thought he'd forget, and then maybe he did, and he just really felt that way. Yeah,
he changed his mind.
But just a fun thing about Mike Nesmith that makes all of this that much more interesting is he was independently wealthy. So obviously all of these guys came from different walks of life, but all were in that Hollywood vein. His mom worked in a bank, and she developed, because she was working with paper so much and having to keep logs, she at home crafted this concoction that she could put over numbers to edit things and fix numbers. We know it as whiteout or liquid paper. She invented that.
What?
And held the patent to it and sold it and made, there was a fortune. And he grew up and inherited the liquid paper fortune. So this guy didn't have to be in the Monkees. Like he had his own production company and did his own thing. He did this just as his own creative interest and for fun, but the guy was loaded. He had that liquid paper money. So yeah, very, very, very strange thing. And then the last thing I'll say is, so after the news of his passing, Ben Gibbard, who I think Death Cab is going to be one of those, I need the full catalog, the full discography. That'll be after REM. But Ben Gibbard had actually worked with the Monkees a bunch.
Really?
He wrote a song for them. So they did an anniversary release. I think it was a 50th anniversary release about 5 years ago. And there were a handful of artists that wrote songs for him. I'm blanking on some of the others. I think Noel Gallagher wrote one. And he wrote a song called Me and Magdalena that they performed for that album. It was like a collection of songs that they didn't record in the 60s that they went back and re-recorded.
Oh, cool.
And then songs that were written by other famous songwriters that they were friends with. And he got to know them. He performed with them a few times. And so when the news of Mike's passing came out, he went on Instagram, as he did at the very beginning of lockdown, where he just like went live from his bedroom and was doing like mini Death Cab for Cutie concerts solo every night. So he did a tribute, like a 5-song acoustic kind of tribute to Mike Nesmith, all songs that Mike wrote, and then he did the song that he wrote for the Monkees. So it's up there. It's on
Wow.
social media. It's beautiful. I mean, Ben's fantastic. The songs are great, man. Like these guys went and created their own kind of musical sound out of a sitcom, out of Gilligan's Island level like sitcom. And it's still a funny show to watch today. And it's sad that there's one left, I mean, that again, we've talked about it before. Like that's just the way it is. We're going to talk about the Beatles and we've got two, but like, there's one Monkey, two Beatles. We got a bunch of Stones. That's the way it is.
And of all of those, you would think the Stones, I don't know. I felt like they were the bigger partiers. So it's weird that they're around and Ozzy is still around, but
it makes sense that we lost all the Ramones. But I mean, it's sad. I love the Ramones.
It's sad, but
it kind of makes sense.
Yes,
kind of checks out. Yeah,
it does.
And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on here was just an obvious thing that everybody's heard about now, but like vinyl sales are just bananas.
Yep.
The numbers from Black Friday, which admittedly I said last time, like I looked at the lineup for the record store day, Black Friday, and I skipped it. I went in afterwards. I grabbed a thing or two. Most of it was gone, which is a good sign, I guess. But like, I don't think that this Black Friday was even that strong of a showing. And LP, like vinyl sales, accounted for 46% of all albums sold. That's digital and everything. Not that there are people buying that many digital albums, but that's, Amazon digital albums, whatever. And about 55% of all physical. It was 1.46 million vinyl records in a week, like 1.5 million units. So, we talk about the production. It's going somewhere. Like people are buying these things. And the initial Adele album count came out, and she's sold 250,000 copies already.
Oh wow!
It's a ton. I mean,
of the vinyl specifically.
The vinyl, I think, is 160,000, something around there. Like I think the only person who's sold more vinyl is Taylor Swift this year. And Adele's thing's only been out for 2 weeks. Right. So,
goodness.
We talked about how that they prioritized making sure that they had product on the shelves, and it looks like they were spot on. Like that people are going out. I think Adele's album is that tentpole moment where people will spring and pay for the extra money to hang it on the wall and have it in this permanent form that is tangible and you can hold it.
Right. There's something about it. And who knows really what it is at the heart of it, but people are realizing that there really is something to having whatever you want to call it, a memento or a token, something physical that can't be taken away from them at the whim of a corporation. You know what I mean?
Right.
Everyone's had that experience where a show or a movie that you absolutely love is just randomly removed from the streaming platform that you have access to. And, initially everything was on Netflix, and then everybody realized, we can do our own thing and we don't have to, license this stuff out. We have our own content. We can have our own streaming service. So now you've got Disney and Paramount and Peacock, and it's like, they're all just doing their own thing now. Yeah. And people are like, well, what the heck? Now, I got rid of cable and started the whole streaming thing because it was less expensive and it was everything in one source without having to piecemeal it out. And now things are being taken away from me that I initially had access to, that I paid for, and now I don't. So I think as time goes on, people are realizing the value of having a physical media, and who knows why it's vinyl that's just blowing up. But there's something to it. There's something about it. And I can speculate, but I can't, I don't know what 160,000 people are thinking when, when purchasing the Adele record. It's
well, there's something to the analog nature of it that you can't find in a video game, you can't find in a film or a TV show unless you're actually dealing with reels, like physical film, which you never have, like VHSs, I guess you did, but you're not going to be able to replicate that in a visual form. But in audio, you can get that where the physical and the analog, the actual content is improved, whereas like I think the best version of a movie is going to be the Blu-ray, but it still feels cold. It doesn't. There's not a warmth to that. The medium doesn't feel like you're engaging with it like you physically are. You have to physically prepare and take care of your vinyl and engage with it, and it's not just slipping a disc into a drive.
Yeah. There is just something, and I made this comparison on the Retro Logic podcast, but even something as simple as Christmas lights. The difference between LED and incandescent Christmas lights is, technically the LED lights can do more. They use less energy. They'll probably last longer. They're less of a hassle to deal with. They don't get hot. They're not going to burn down your Christmas tree. But the incandescent bulbs have some kind of soul to them. And I actually had a moment when I recently picked up an old CRT television. Did you physically pick it up? Yes.
Those things are heavy.
Wow. It was heavy.
You've been eating your Wheaties. Good job. I can't pick mine up.
Well, it was a relatively small, and it was kind of a later model. It's one that has the actual flat screen.
Yeah.
And someone was literally giving it away for free on Facebook Marketplace, and they were like, please come take this dinosaur off of my hands.
People are paying for those now. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a Sony Trinitron going for $125. So it's like, people know what they're doing.
My local game stores figured that out. I mean, look, it's hard to carry inventory of that kind of stuff because of space, but they sell them for like 60, 80, $100 now for
There's
things that I'm finding on the side of the road. Yeah.
So I had this moment where I got it home, and because I had gotten that NES recently, and I plugged everything up. I screwed in the RF adapter to the back of the TV, and I turned on the TV, and I actually like jumped back. I had a recoil, and I actually have video of it. There's like a moment where I kind of, when I hit the power button, I kind of do this little like, am I gonna get electrocuted thing, because it goes,
the crackle,
it goes pong, like. It's like I felt it in my chest, and it's like the whatever is going on. I don't know I'm not an electrical engineer. I don't understand what it is that's happening inside that cathode ray tube, but it was like something physically changed in the room. It's not the same thing as turning on a flat panel display, an LCD or whatever.
There's a hum to it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you hear it. And my older daughter was like, what is that? It's hurting my ears. Because you can hear it. It kind of sounds like tinnitus a little bit. And so my younger daughter was so enthralled with she played Mario 2 for a lot longer than I thought she would, because
it's hard.
I don't know. She liked being Princess Peach, and it was just a fascinating new thing for her, this ancient technology. But, my older daughter's like, can you, when she was playing it, she's like, can you close the door to that room because it's loud? And, but I had a moment when I first turned it on, and I first started fiddling with the NES, and, trying to get it to work, and because it's a little bit of a process with 35-year-old technology to get it to work.
Yeah.
And I started playing, and there was just such a similarity to the experience that I have when I put on a vinyl record, because it felt like the character that I was controlling on the screen was an extension of me, because it was so instantaneous. It was me deciding Mario to jump instead of I hit a button and then eventually a character on the screen reacts. You know what I mean? It just feels real. And obviously the fidelity is nowhere near what modern games can do, in the same way that if we're talking fidelity wise, unless you have a very, very expensive setup, a CD is going to, again, fidelity wise, be more clear and accurate than a vinyl record for the most part.
Correct.
But it doesn't sound alive.
Alive, yeah. It's not warm.
Putting on a record, to me, you close your eyes, it feels like the band is in the room with you. And so I had that kind of similar, almost semi-euphoria, not to get weird about it, but
no.
It's a real thing. So maybe these people are starting to realize, especially in this day and age where, COVID has a lot of us staying inside a lot more than we normally would. And, everything is fake. You know what I mean? Just like, oh, did you see this video? It's like, oh yeah, it's totally fake. You know what I mean? Everything's fake.
Everything's intangible. Yeah,
right.
To have a part, to hold a piece of something, to be a part of a thing. I mean, like, an NFT is never going to be what a physical piece of something that's important to you is, whether it's any sort of art. I have to ask, though, when you've turned on the CRTV, did you do the thing where you like put your arm up to the screen and all of the hair stands up on your arm? Because it's still super fun to do that.
No, I need to try that.
Yeah, you should do that. I remember doing that as a kid because I was just fascinated. Like, if you put it up close, everything stands up and you're like...
That
it was kind of like watching
electricity.
Mr. Wizard's World or Bill Nye when they put their hand on the orb. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And so when I turned mine on, that's the first thing I showed my daughter. I was like,
it's alive.
Put your hand up here. Look at this. This is so cool, right? Watch what it did to me. It's
alive.
It's impacting me. The energy is there enough that it's impacting me physically. Yeah.
And I liken that to when you put a record on and that needle drops, there's that sudden like, and it's almost startling, you know what I mean? Just like I got startled when I turn on that CRT. And then you hear something, no matter how good your system is, how good your cartridge is and all of that.
Yeah.
You hear something when that needle drops. But what are you actually hearing? Like, what is that? What is that energy?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm getting too
No, you're
woo-woo
right.
about it.
No, it's 100%. I mean, like, I think that there's a lot to be said, like in meditation and all of like using vibrations and using sound. Sound has such a subconscious impact on you across the board that I'm sure that there is something there, especially if you hold nostalgia for it, but just the like physical warmth and the resonance in your presence is enough, I think.
Yeah.
One other thing I'd be remiss in pointing out is and it's a trend that I love and I celebrate, and I've been kind of screaming about how exciting it is for years now as you look at festival lineups and stuff. But when you look at the top artists right now just on the chart, it's Adele, it's Taylor Swift, Olivia Rodrigo, Billie Eilish. Women are the voice of pop culture, of music, of songwriting. I mean, it is outrageous and exciting to see female voices just like getting the due. And it was watching Carole King's performance on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame thing and hearing her talk about Taylor Swift carrying the torch. But you just see the people who broke the ceiling, the people who carried the torch through the 80s and 90s. There have always been powerful female voices in music, but I don't think that there's a single guy doing anything like what women are doing.
Not right now. No.
There's no one. I mean, there are some great singer-songwriters out there, but there is no one who can hold any candle to any of these women across every genre: hip-hop, R&B, indie, alt, whatever it is, like country. It is crazy, man. Like, I'm here for it. It's fantastic. It is taking music, every genre of music, in new and beautiful directions. It's very exciting.
I love it.
And let it be, on the heels of what we're going to be talking about, Let It Be came back into the top 10 and sold like 20,000 copies this past week. So I'm again, like this, we're going to be talking about it for a reason. Like this documentary has had a big impact and has reminded everybody of this band. And so it's kind of fun, alongside all of the pop records and some of the normal Christmas stuff, to see Let It Be kind of come back into the conversation and be something that people are engaging with. Although, and not to get ahead of myself, it's weird that it's not Abbey Road too. Like, I know Let It Be is obviously like, I mean, there's so much Abbey Road in that documentary. So
yeah, it's interesting
we'll
to
save
see
that for the B-side.
For sure. But that's a good segue though.
Yeah.
But before we flip it over, as we do, want to hit a little bit of music history and celebrate some birthdays. So December 15th, 1944. I don't know how familiar you are with his catalog, but American big band musician, arranger, composer, and band leader Glenn Miller was killed when his aircraft disappeared in bad weather over the English Channel, traveling to entertain U.S. troops during World War II.
Oh my God. I don't know anything about this.
Yeah, that's how he passed. He was literally the best-selling recording artist from 1939 to 1943.
That's so crazy.
I have very, very few memories of either of my grandparents listening, either sets of my grandparents listening to music, but there are two memories that stand out. One is my Italian grandmother making the sauce in the kitchen and bopping to Billie Jean playing on the radio. And the second is my grandfather on the other side of my family, sitting down next to his hi-fi and listening to Glenn Miller. So that is, it just indicative of the era that he grew up in. And yeah,
I've got to go listen to some Glenn Miller. And so I gotta look, did they find his plane ever? Like, what? That's so crazy that, like, to think that any of the artists that we just talked about, if they went missing Amelia Earhart style in the midst of everything,
right.
I mean, it would be the most known thing you'd think forever.
Well, it was,
that's so
it was the mid 40s.
I'm
know
sure
what
it was
I mean?
a big news item. Yeah.
It was big news,
No
but
internet.
like what can you do at that point? The technology isn't there to go scouring the ocean floor for the wreckage. You know what I mean? So,
wow.
Yeah, that's what happened on December 15th, 1944. Also on December 15th in 1988, soul singer, King of Soul, James Brown was sentenced to 6 years in prison for various offenses, including possession of weapons and resisting arrest. But he still is the King of Soul to this day.
That's right.
I don't
He's
care.
The best.
And then a few birthdays. December 17th, 1939, Eddie Kendricks of the Temptations. We lost him in October 1992. December 17th, 1947, American drummer Jim Hodder, Steely Dan. He also played drums on Linda Ronstadt's hit "You're No Good." I didn't know that.
No, I didn't know that either.
Hodder
Steely Dan.
drowned at his home swimming pool in June of 1990. Yeah, what is it with musicians dying by drowning?
Yeah.
That's like
Guys,
the
don't go
third
swim.
one that we've mentioned
Don't
in
go
as
to
many.
the beach. What are you doing? Man.
Or just if you're gonna go swimming, avoid any substances before.
Yeah, I think it's that. Swimming
and substances do not mix. Anyway, not to assume anything, but I mean, it fits the profile, I guess.
It probably does. Yeah.
And then speaking of REM earlier, December 17th, 1958, happy birthday to Mike Mills, bass player of REM. And then we talked about the Stones earlier too, December 18th, 1943.
Still kicking.
Keith Richards. Who knows how this guy, he was born before Glenn Miller passed away. He's that old. How?
Jeez. Right.
That's crazy.
You're right. Wow. Yeah, I don't know, man. A lot of vodka and cigarettes. It worked out
at some
for him.
point, the alcohol just preserves you instead of it's like if you get past a certain point, it's
for sure.
Or he's got the Aussie gene. I don't know.
Well, he figured it out. He drinks vodka and orange soda, and little did we know that that's actually the magical elixir of life. That's all you need to survive is orange soda and vodka.
Well, switching to vodka didn't help Lemmy, unfortunately.
Just so you know. That's true, but he wasn't drinking Crush.
Oh, it was okay. So it's
you
the
need
orange
the Fanta.
soda. Okay.
Fanta.
Any of those. Any orange soda is not a specific.
Any orange soda.
Okay, great.
Yeah, don't do pineapple. It's gross.
That is gross. And then also on December 18th, 1970, we just recently lost him, DMX.
Yeah.
December 18th, 1980, happy birthday to Christina Aguilera. And
Talked
then,
about her last time. Come on.
And then speaking of Billie Eilish a little bit earlier.
That's right.
Happy birthday, Billie Eilish, December 18th, 2001. This is probably the first artist that we've celebrated their birthday on this podcast that was born post 9/11. Which is weird.
It's true.
Makes me feel old because it's like, I feel like 9/11 was a few years ago and here she is, full-blown adult, one of the most popular artists in the world. And she was born post 9/11. She didn't see it happen on TV like the rest of us. So it's just weird. It's interesting to think about that.
It's very weird, and it's only going to happen more and more.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
I just, as we're talking here, I am looking at this Glenn Miller stuff because I am fascinated.
It's a mystery, right?
And it seems like there was in 2010 to 2017, they opened up an investigation to try and figure out what exactly
the plot
happened.
Thickens.
Because there was some kind of movie back in the day, and some navigator came out and thought that he figured out like what might have happened, and then they did a bunch of research. I'm gonna have to do a deep dive. This is fascinating. I mean, I can't read all of this right now, but there's a lot here.
Why is there not is there a documentary on this? There has to be.
It looks like there was a film in the 50s. I don't see anything recent, but again, this is a cursory look, but I can't believe that I'm looking at, like, from his estate, I'm looking at stuff from like 2019 where they're still trying to.
Wow.
They're still investigating it. They have, in 2019, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery is still investigating his disappearance.
Oh my God.
This is amazing. I love that you opened this up. This is what I'm going to do this weekend.
So we're going to launch an entire offshoot podcast about
Oh my God, dude, like murder crime podcasts do so well. Why don't we just do that? Oh my gosh. This is a whole spin-off. I love this. Also, it's creepy.
But focus on, musicians that were either murdered or died under mysterious circumstances.
You found that guy who got run over by like a bunch of wheat, right? Like
yes,
there was that guy.
He was
from the Moody Blues or something.
It was one of the string. He was a cello player for Electric Light Orchestra.
ELO?
Yes.
Yeah.
And a huge bale of hay somehow came loose and came barreling down a hill and smashed into his vehicle. And I hate to laugh about
Very
it,
sus. No, it's sus, dude. And I think that we're going to get into Glenn Miller first, and then we're going back to that one.
Yes, because inquiring minds want to know.
That's right.
All right. Well, to get a little bit away from people dying under mysterious circumstances, we're going to flip it over to side B. And today, B stands for Beatles. And
That's right.
We're going to give the only unique perspective that we can give on the Beatles, which is our own personal perspective. And so
Right.
we'll talk about that. We'll talk about Get Back. And we will get back after we flip it over. Welcome back. Thank you for flipping it over with us. This is side B of our 14th episode of Retro Groove. And both Liam and I have just recently finished the 3-part docu-series by Peter Jackson, specifically about the Beatles' process of recording or writing, recording, and performing their Let It Be album. And we've got our own personal thoughts and opinions, but before we get to that film or docuseries, whatever you want to call it, Liam, do you remember like your earliest Beatles encounter or hearing them for the first time or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, a bit. I will say just on the documentary real quick that
Sure.
we're very lucky that he didn't turn this into a trilogy. He basically did. It's a
He
3-part
did.
series, but he likes to make trilogies.
Yeah.
And so I'm not surprised that all 3 pieces are almost 3 hours at length. Like, it felt like he hobbited us a little bit on this.
A little bit.
I'm happy about it. There's a lot of great content there, but like there were smog moments where I'm like, okay, there's a lot. Like I've heard Get Back about 50 times now.
Right.
And I don't know what's going on. Personal stuff. So my mom was a massive Beatles fan. Actually, there's no video component to this podcast, but I'll show you. So I've got this record here.
Wow.
This is hers. She's had this thing with me where, and now I won't do it, but for a little while there, she was like trying to get me to sell it because it's actually.
Well, tell us what it is, because
it's introducing the Beatles. It's their first album, and it's got this thing. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but it's got this thing that looks like a stain over here, and it's actually George's shadow.
Yeah, it's his shadow.
And the version of this, because the distribution was weird. The version of this also has this like rainbow VJ sticker. Mm-hmm. Allegedly, it's worth a couple $100.
Wow.
Who knows what it's actually worth? But so my mom would every once in a while be like, "You should sell my Beatles record," and I'm like, "I think I'm going to hold on."
Yeah.
To it for a while. And then we'll figure that out, Mom.
Like, that's not the way that I roll.
But yeah, but like we definitely like things like Twist and Shout would be stuff that like we would just jokingly around the house sing. My mom would be singing it or you'd hear it. I remember hearing it at like elementary school sock hop dances and stuff.
Right.
You know, like the Beatles you're just viscerally exposed to. And I'll say, admittedly, as a kid, it kind of gave me that knee-jerk reaction of not really appreciating or engaging with it.
This is old music.
Yeah, it kind of felt like that. Like, this is my mom's music.
Yes,
And I didn't want to listen to my mom's music. My dad listened to ZZ Top, and I didn't want to listen to that either. And then I came around on both, you know? Like, I definitely, I had a buddy who used to sing Beatles songs he'd play acoustic guitar, and they were good. He'd sing, like, Rocky Raccoon and stuff, and I'd sing along. Like, I knew it. But it didn't resonate with me. I never had a Beatles fandom moment. And then when I went to college, my roommate was a jazz major, and he had the White Album. And I heard Piggies for the first time, and I was like, this song's amazing. It's a George Harrison joint.
Yep.
And I was like, wow, okay, hold on. Like, suddenly it went from twist and shout mom sock hop music to like, oh right, these guys like got really elevated and figured stuff out. And so the first vinyl record that I went to a used record store and bought was Sgt. Pepper,
There it is.
which remains to be my favorite. I have like 3 different copies of Sgt. Pepper at this point, like CD, vinyl,
Right.
whatever. So Sgt. Pepper is that was my moment, because that was like suddenly that was that merging for me of like, it's this pop sensibility, just untouchable songwriting, but experimental, right?
Yeah.
Like there's so much going on there, and you can go back to the earlier records and see that if you're looking for it and you figure it out.
You can
But
watch the
Sgt. Pepper,
progression.
right? But that's the basis of Sgt. Pepper for me. Is it's like it's so weird and all over the place, but so smart and so well written.
Yeah.
And so then I started using his record player to listen to Sgt. Pepper, and then he would throw on the White Album. And then just over the years, just kind of experiencing their music more and more. Again, I've never been a massive super fan, but I've always had a really strong appreciation. I definitely am my mother's son when it comes to my favorite Beatle. She was a George guy, George lady. I'm a George guy.
There you go.
And I will say that this documentary wholly reaffirms me
Yes.
as a George fan, and honestly made me a big Ringo fan. Not
Yeah,
to get
dude.
ahead of myself, but like,
Absolutely.
man, Ringo's fun.
Ringo is dope.
Ringo's great. He is there for it. I love Ringo Starr now. But yeah, no. So George Harrison, fantastic. It's fun to, kind of, if you earmark some of your favorite Beatles songs and you looking at them, and I'm like, oh, okay, so George Harrison wrote a lot of them. Like I love Paul McCartney and Lennon songs. They're all great, but it is fun that some of the ones that hit me the most, like Something and Here Comes the Sun and While My Guitar Gently Weeps and Piggies, like I'm like, oh, okay. Like I was connecting with George Harrison before I knew I was connecting with George Harrison.
Yep.
You know?
And I think a lot of people have that experience where as they get older and realize that, there were particular songwriters and some of the songs were written by this person or it was primarily written by that person, patterns start to emerge. And I always say that, not to say that only George Harrison fans are real Beatles fans, but if someone says that George Harrison is their favorite Beatle, they are a real Beatles fan, because
I guess.
because a fake Beatles fan wouldn't say that.
Sure. Yeah, that's true. That's
So-
true. What about you?
Well, so again, not to retread old ground, but the first memory that I have is being introduced to the Beatles by my Aunt Sue. And from my memory, I should say the first song that I remember hearing is I Want to Hold Your Hand. And
Oh my God.
I liked it, and I didn't, I wouldn't say that it was a life-changing moment or anything, but it was memorable.
It feels like an Aunt Sue song. Like
Absolutely.
it's a catchy song, but it feels like an Aunt Sue song.
But and there was that kind of aspect too, like, oh, this is music that, my parents liked when they were kids. It's, you know what I mean? There's that feeling of it feels like old rock and roll music, early rock and roll music, which it is. And but when you're that age, you don't really have an appreciation for that yet. What turned me into a real fan was at some point I found myself watching the Help movie.
Oh, okay.
And so as soon as I heard, for some reason, Help, it's the song,
Yeah.
that was like, whoa, that just like, that blew my mind for some reason. I must have been 6 or 7. I wasn't, older and wiser or anything. It just was, for some reason, I connected with that. The movie to me felt very like Monty Python-esque, so I liked it for that reason. Because even at that early age, I was a huge Monty Python fan, which probably shouldn't have been watching at that age.
Yeah,
some of the content, but it had an effect on me. And then I guess a little bit later on in my teenage years, when I started actually, going through my parents' old records that were just, in a box in the garage that they didn't care about anymore because CDs were the thing now, and discovering artists that way. I came across a copy of the White Album, and I was like, oh, Beatles. I remember the Beatles, and put it on. And then it's like, what happened to the Beatles? What is this? Like, and then, without seeing the transition of, Rubber Soul to Revolver and going through the process, that's a big jump going from Help to the White Album.
Yeah, for sure.
So, those are some kind of key memories for me.
Well, and the White Album, it's interesting because the White Album comes into play a bunch in this documentary.
Yeah.
We're coming off of the heels of it, right? We're coming off of the Magical Mystery Tour, or Yellow Submarine rather, and then the White Album. But the White Album, like as you and I are both kind of talking about, is that transitionary point or that like aha moment, at least for us, again, anecdotally for us, where we're like, oh, the Beatles are more than Twist and Shout and I Want to Hold Your Hand, right? They are this elevated thing that is so dynamic. And then when you look at Revolver and Sgt. Pepper or whatever, it's been there. Like you're right. There is this progression there.
It's like their
but
OK
the White
Computer.
Album is just so undeniable, right? Yeah, it is. You're right. But I think that it's so undeniable, and that's why it's interesting seeing this part of the band then, right, in this documentary. It's also interesting because I think that before all of this, around the time of the White Album, that Ringo left the band.
Yep.
Like I think in 68 or whatever it was that he quit the band for a while. And then came back. And then again, I don't know if we should say that there's spoilers. Can there be spoilers for this documentary?
I mean, this is
it's
historic
a documentary
at this
about
point.
something.
Yeah. There's no spoilers here. We can talk about it.
So George leaves the band, right?
Yep.
And George quits during this documentary. And Ringo, meanwhile, seems just so jazzed about, like he's so nonchalant and just ready to be there and happy, and
he's just ready to play. He just wants to play. He doesn't care who's there.
He makes me so happy. He's almost like the comic relief through the whole thing, through the tension. He's the guy. Yeah. But I'll say, like, there is this thing that kept kind of creeping into my head throughout all of this, because the initial part of this documentary, the framework of it is that the reason why this is happening is because of Ringo. Ringo is going to be in a movie.
Oh,
and
yep.
There's a production schedule that the band, the Beatles, have to adhere to Ringo Starr's movie schedule because it's an Apple Films thing. So it's all in the family. It's not like he's really wholly going off and doing his own thing. It's still within the Apple brand and family. So I just, everything, like every time there's tension, I start wondering, like, does Ringo feel like he caused this because it's his thing? But it never once comes up where he's just like, well, maybe I could push my production. Like it's
probably
always just there.
It probably wasn't his decision. He probably doesn't really have a say in it anyway. as
Right.
far as that aspect of it goes.
Right.
But it is interesting to see, you would think that they should have as much time as they could possibly need to create
Yeah.
whatever it is that they want to create. But, it's almost like, it almost feels like they painted themselves into a corner on purpose,
Maybe.
which is, as somebody who is familiar with the creative process, creates music, there is something to be said for that. There's something,
Like setting boundaries or
yeah,
something.
especially
you mean?
in especially in the modern era of, I have my little digital recording studio at home. I'm not paying somebody $60 an hour to record my music. You know what I
Right.
mean? So I'm essentially unlimited as to the amount of time that I can take. So painting yourself into a corner can be a very powerful creative tool, because it forces you to move forward and you have to do something. And sometimes
Right.
digging deep to just get something done, rather than, oh, I've got all the time in the world to figure this out. It forces, we've all experienced similar situations like that at work, where,
Right.
if you have a report or a project or something that's due, if it's 2 weeks away, you're not even thinking about it.
Yeah.
But if it's due
And-
the
and-
next day, you're using all of your skill sets to get that thing completed and make it as good as you possibly can, because there's a
Right.
deadline.
And you're also in this point, this comparison, you're bringing up your own ability to self-police.
Right.
You don't have in this scenario that you're talking about, you don't have a parent, and that is what's happening here with the Beatles at this point, right? Brian Epstein is dead.
Right.
He overdoses. He has been their manager, and now they're self-managed. They decide they don't have somebody else they're going to trust. They keep talking throughout the documentary, and John eventually meets with Alan Klein, who's the Rolling Stones manager. But like that, I mean, this is the end of the band as we know.
Right.
Like there is no Beatles to manage after this. And again, we're talking about things that I'm sure have been researched, and there are dissertations written about all of this. But like, the death of Brian Epstein in many ways is the death of the Beatles. Like, it seems like without his direction, a lot of what frustratingly happens throughout this documentary is just they go round in circles. They can't make decisions for themselves. And they're at this moment too. It's like the perfect storm of growth and self-expression, and everybody's got their own vision on things, and they've become who they are. And at the moment that they need someone with a firm hand to say, this is what the Beatles are and this is what we're doing, they have no one.
Right.
And they do it themselves. And so your comparison is so apt, because it's like, how do you police yourself as a solo artist, let alone a group of 4 artists that are trying to be one and can't be one?
No, and that don't see eye to eye much of the time, and there's a lot of concessions being made. I
have a question. I have
Go
a
ahead.
question for you, real quick. So, as a musician, as a creator, right? When you watch the songwriting process in this documentary, is it everybody has their own, right? I've heard artists that pluck things out of the air, and then you have Rivers Cuomo, who has an Excel document that he can search. Like everybody has their own way. But I gotta say, like, I definitely remember taking a course in college that showed a way, or various ways, to examine and interpret art, whether it was painted art, music art, whatever. And I remember as I was learning this thinking, like, I don't know if you can do that, because the artist has a vision, and you can spend your time trying to figure out what the artist's vision was, or you can spend the time trying to think of how it makes you feel. I don't know which is right, but it seems like it should probably be the latter and not the former. Like I do appreciate why someone writes lyrics and the purpose of a song, but at the same time, I think that art is all about the engagement. And so when I watch them write these things, when I see like the genius almost of like where it's coming from, as Paul has a melody and he's bouncing things around, right? Or George, any of them.
Yeah.
And they don't know what the words are. The words don't mean anything.
Nope.
Right? Like I as a creator, do you feel that way sometimes where you're just like, you don't know what it is, but you're forming it?
Yep.
I don't know.
Absolutely. And again, this probably isn't indicative of every creator of no matter what type it is, because everyone's got their own process. And even a person might have multiple processes that, you know, one song might be written this way and another song is written another way. And even if going back to the Beatles, even talking about Paul, you know what I mean? We watched on film Get Back be formed out of nothingness.
How amazing was that, dude?
That's like the moment of the whole film.
Yeah, it clicks. It like I have that written down here. I love it. Like it clicks, and John's not even there, right? Like it's, you just watch it come from the ether where he's just like, it's just happening. Oh,
right.
It feels so good.
And it's almost happens because John isn't there, because they're just kind of goofing around.
Yeah, he's like, what am I going to find? I'm going to pull something out. What do I have? What can it be? And yeah.
So it's like, so we watched Paul have this moment where they're just jamming. They're just goofing around. They're just playing instruments. And you watch the melody kind of form and come in and out of, existence. And the lyrics aren't anywhere close to what they end up being. And he's just working it out. And it takes a while to get to where it sounds anything like what we know the song in its final form to be. But Paul also, the song Yesterday came to him in a dream. And I've had experiences like that too, where I'll hear practically a fully formed song in a dream. And then, most of the time there's really no feasible way for me to like get it all down or figure out how to turn that into reality and manifest it. But it's just interesting that there can be, it's not just like each artist has the one particular process to create something and make something happen. And I'm sure that goes for, any other, medium, not just music. But yeah, there were moments that I really identified with where, they're working out a melody and they're going, like they don't know what the words are yet, but the melody is there.
Yeah, George says that he's been trying to figure out the words to something for 6 months, and he's just been saying cauliflower or pomegranate.
Pomegranate.
And it's like, and they're all like, yeah, just throw words around until the right one hits. And what's crazy for me is like, when you think of artists' interviews or features or whatever that you see or you hear, one of the first questions that every artist gets asked is, what is this song about, right? What is this about? And I'm like, we should probably never ask that again. Right. We should probably let it come up in a conversation if it can, because sometimes there is deep meaning. Or with some of these Beatles songs, as you see it, like they come from who knows where. There's no answer. And then they decide what the message is, right? They're like, okay, well, the words are then going to mean this because I feel this way about white nationalism or whatever. And so like, this is now what the song is going to be about. And so you let the artist dictate what the song is about. But asking an artist what a song is about or where it comes from, it's where does the air come from? I mean, you can figure it out, but like God, man, how complicated and it doesn't matter to what it actually makes you feel. So I just such a big takeaway from all of this, and also just as I looked through Abbey Road, because you could you look at the credits and you figure it out as you're watching George kind of exert himself and find his confidence and want to push in as a songwriter. And then you see also Paul's frustration that John isn't writing. Like, he's not coming in there and doing what Paul's doing, and he's not bringing things into this. And then when you look at the liner notes on these last two albums, he's a co-writer. You can see him co-writing on a lot of this, but he's not bringing in this material. And you see that it's the Paul show. He wants it to be, in many ways, Paul wants it to be the Paul show. He's trying to be diplomatic, but he has a vision. And then you see the George tension there, where George feels like he's being dismissed because, again, I'm reading into the situation, but the way I interpreted it is Paul is frustrated with the situation as a whole. He's frustrated and sad about losing his, like, quintessential writing partner who established one of the most important songwriting duos in existence.
Exactly.
And then you have this guitarist who you've loved and worked with since day one who wants to have a voice, and you're like, I'm just trying to deal with this other thing right now. And dismissing him, and the guy's like, well, then I'm leaving. Goodbye.
Exactly.
Which is so fair, you know?
You can't blame George, definitely.
Not at all.
And
I walked away from this like bigger George fan than ever before. Yeah.
I was always a George fan. I agree with you on, Ringo, no pun intended, being the unsung star of the show, where, the other Beatles are, they look tired and they look frustrated. And then, you look over at Ringo and he's like putting a music stand together and like, aping to the camera and like doing silly stuff with it. He's just there having fun.
But a band needs a backbone too. Like how important that is. Like as that kind of support, he was always there. Always there and smiling and happy to be there and excited about this. And he knew what was happening. Everybody knew through the whole thing that this was the end. Like, it's always known throughout all of this that they know that this is the end. And I love, there's this little part, you can blink and miss it, where they're working on a Ringo song, Octopus's Garden.
Yeah, I
That's
love that
his
part.
song. And it's him and George working through his song. And he's like, okay, well, I've got my thing I want to do. And like, it never... There's no contention or whatever. It just is a thing that exists, and it's a beautiful little moment. And so with all of the George and Paul and everything that's happening, you just see this little thing where like Ringo has his creative stamp and he does his thing, and then the rest of the time he's just in the pocket. He's carrying
for sure.
Another thing about, we were talking about the misconceptions that can exist from like time, right? We were talking about how we would think, it's the Beatles, they can do whatever they want. We would think that the police wouldn't shut them down or try to shut them down at the end, right? But another thing that kept coming up that I just found so interesting is money. Like, they talk about not having recouped everything from the Magical Mystery Tour yet. They're talking about like who's getting
royalties,
the amps, who's paying for the amps for this thing. And then they're talking about the Maharaji at one point, and which is, I mean, my wife was watching here and there, 9 hours or whatever, but like she punched in at one point, and there's a whole thing with the Maharaji that blew my mind. But real quick, the Maharaji thing, one of them makes a joke saying, I'd love to have that money. And another one is, yeah, I know. And I'm thinking like, you're the Beatles. But you have to, like, at that point, you didn't have the franchising. You didn't have the stuffed figures and the action figures or whatever it was. And they didn't really tour much. Like, I'm sure that they made plenty of money. You saw the fur coats. You saw the cars. They were living their life. They were fine. But it wasn't this exuberance that you'd think would exist at the end of the Beatles, man. Like, they were the biggest band, and they're still talking about who's paying for the boat or the proposed boat to Tripoli or whatever, because they're like, I don't have that money.
Nope.
It's the Beatles. What are you talking about? You don't have that money.
And they eventually, if memory serves, this is because this is off the top of my head, but so the at one point it was the remaining Beatles and then the family members of those that had passed had to sue EMI to actually get the royalties that they were deserved.
Yeah.
And
yeah. No, then Michael Jackson bought their publishing or something. It's
oh yeah, that's a whole nother
too,
story. And I always love that video of Paul McCartney kind of doing his Michael Jackson impression, telling the story of what happened. I'm
going to buy your
records.
I'm going to buy your songs.
That's a great clip.
He taught Michael of the opportunity of, and then Michael's like,
and he did.
I'm going to do that to you.
So,
but so back on the Maharaji thing or Mahariji thing. So you see George has the Hare Krishna folks with him, right? At the first soundstage.
Yes.
And then later in the documentary, they're talking about that excursion to India. And there's that poignant moment, man. I jotted it down because it was like they're talking about how they didn't do the work that they probably should have done, or I forget how they phrased it, but it was something to the effect of like, when we were there, it was kind of like school, and we phoned it in and didn't actually do the work. And that's Paul saying it to the group with John in agreement, or maybe vice versa. And George kind of says, well, if you had found yourself there, then you wouldn't be who you are right now.
Yeah.
Like it's this really in your face kind of subtle
George.
thing where it's like, I did the work.
Yep.
You didn't. Like, y'all are the ones who are this thing. I went there. I came back transformed. This is who I am now. And you guys are just realizing that, like, you kind of squandered this opportunity. But the weird thing is, for me, as a mild fan, I always thought that all of them came back transformed, especially John. Like, I thought that part of his enlightenment came from that. And to hear this, my wife and I kind of looked at each other and we were like, wait, John didn't come back from India a changed person? Like, he admits it right there that, like, he kind of phoned it in during that trip.
Yeah, and
that was jarring for me, man. That shocked me.
Yeah, and you can kind of see that in his kind of later philosophy, is that he found his path in something else entirely, and it is interesting to see. I just a side note, I love how they did this in the film, because it's footage of them talking about this experience, and at one point they're even talking about the reels of video footage that they have, but
16 to 35,
but then they splice in video from the trip into the film, and it's cool. It's cool to see them go back and forth like that. It'll show them talking about it, and then what I love that the filmmakers did is that at one point John is joking about, when that happens, we'll put letters on the screen that say,
a film by John Lennon.
Filmed by John Lennon, and they put it on the screen. I thought that was
really
great. That was wonderful. That was a great moment. I laughed out loud at that.
The storytelling, because again, there's no, in a lot of rock docs or whatever, you have talking head moments, and you need talking head moments. And in this, it was them themselves in the moment, in the raw footage, right? Like it was so fly on the wall and so well put together in the editing room. You can see why Peter Jackson spent years working on this, that you didn't need, there was, you had occasional text that went along the bottom that gave you the context, but you didn't need much of that because the band was doing it themselves in the archival footage. It told its own story by the way that he edited it. It was fantastic.
Yep.
I the thing that I kept coming back to, and I don't know if you've ever had this personal experience, but what this kept feeling like, you try to find when you engage with something, you draw parallels and find comparisons to your life. And as I watched this, it felt so much like it has felt for me at times, reconnecting with childhood friends, high school friends or whatever that I had a bond with. And then years later, you reconnect, and there's still that echo. There's still that want to have that bond, and you'll never not have what you had, but you've also become something wholly different.
Yes.
And you're doing that dance. Like, these times in the studio felt very much like conversations that I've had, evenings spent where I'm reconnecting, and I'm like, this is it. Like, we might not, there's not going to be a re-engaged flame of friendship out of that. And that's okay. This is it. Like, you can feel that everybody knows in the back of their head, like, we've all become different people now, and this can't exist anymore. And we have to come to terms with that. Because if you force it to, it's probably it's an even bigger mistake, right? You force yourself to do something, and then it's completely disingenuous, and it can torpedo everything.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But it felt very familiar, like oddly familiar to me. Like I felt myself slipping into the discomfort between Paul and John, where, like, especially with Paul felt hurt. He felt like,
you can see it.
He wanted the old days, and he could tell that it was never coming back.
Yeah. The one part of it that really got me choked up is when, George had quit at this point, and it's like the next day, like, John doesn't show
Ringo's
up.
there.
Yeah. Ringo's there, of course. But, I think it was Paul that looked at Ringo and was like, and then there were two. And he's
glassy-eyed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he's like, you can tell he's trying to keep it together for the cameras. But I was like, oh God, because, me, I'm basically a Paul guy. And that hurt. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I know the phenomenon that you're talking about kind of all too well, even to the point where, I've got a friend that I met in 8th grade, and we literally met and started playing rock and roll music together in, like, the storage closet of the school where we met.
Oh man.
And then we, formed a band, and we played music together. And, when I converse with him now, typically via Facebook, of course, I still have so much deep love and respect and admiration for him. And he's creating some amazing things, but it's like, we are completely different people than we were back then. And it's like, I wish that I could say otherwise. And it's not a negative thing against him or anything like that. But
of course not.
there's no way that I could work with this person creatively just because of how different, you know what I mean? And I wish it would be different, because nowadays you can collaborate without having to even be on the same continent. So one of my favorite groups right now is creating a new album, and one of the 3 members of the band is across the pond in the UK, and 2 of them are here in the States, and they're creating their album, sending files back and forth. So
if you have the same vision or the same kind of brain space or whatever it is, and again, like you said, it's nothing against one
not
or
at
the
all.
other. It's just trajectory.
Yep.
It's wholly trajectory.
The vision is different. You're not the same people that you were, and and it's funny because the Beatles weren't even together for that long, comparatively speaking. It's such a short span of time, and
10 years. If that,
probably less than that. But you, especially in that kind of age bracket of your life, or early, going from late teens, early 20s into your 30s, that is like the biggest transition as far as who you are as a person. So you're not going to see eye to eye with people that at one point you were inseparable. So yeah, I feel that 100%.
We should probably talk about Billy Preston, right?
Well,
'Cause,
yes. And I brought him
man.
up last episode, but
Yeah.
you know, I do feel like they, even if it was unofficial, but as far as I know, he did get writing credits and his name is on, I know for sure his name is on the single, but
That's what I'm looking for right now.
yeah. Oh, and you're looking at liner notes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm not seeing. Come on. Yeah.
But yeah,
I might be missing something.
he
in
is
my package.
effectively one of the Beatles, at least for Get Back.
I mean, it's the only reason that any of this really happens, right? I mean, it's one of the main reasons why George comes back to begin with, and yeah, I mean, he is that that glue
For sure.
or that like sounding board. I mean, you have Ringo as the familiar stalwart, but like he's that like fantastic energy and shiny object that you see each of them engaging with individually, and then all of them can kind of direct their uncomfortable energy aside to focus on him.
Yeah.
Because he is not this known entity that has all this baggage to it, and he's also wildly like talented and can do anything. And like I don't think that any of this happens without him there. Like you
very
watch
possible.
the situation dissolve before all of that, and I think like when he comes into the picture, the energy of the room gets to the point where they can have these hard conversations and work through these songs. It was such a game changer.
For
And again,
sure.
that was George's call. You hear George talking about him up top saying,
Yeah.
you know, he saw him with Ray Charles and he kind of stole the show, like raving about this guy and very, it's foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Like, and again, it's clever editing from Peter, but it also is just raw content, like foreshadowing what is to come.
And you know, in a similar way that Ringo is, he it just seems like he just wants to play. Cause it's like, he was just there sitting in, you know what I mean? He probably assumed that he wasn't getting paid for what he was doing. He just wanted to chill with the Beatles and, you know, George, who, if I'm not mistaken, was basically his friend, and play some dope music. And like, as big of a fan of Paul as I am, if I had to pick, you know, if I was in that room and I had to pick two people to actually create music with as a collaborative effort, I'm picking George and Billy. I'm sorry, Ringo and Billy. I want Ringo and I want Billy. If I could,
because they seem like they're collaborators. Yeah, all the other guys had their own vision. I mean, John, admittedly through all of this, seems like when he's there and when he can be present, he's actually a good collaborator through all of this. He goes back and forth, and again in that kind of like
but
odd
Go ahead.
engagement where they're making the weird like inappropriate fart jokes and like dirty jokes to each other and singing through their teeth and like trying to do all these things that you do to cut the tension and like it like echoes of that juvenile friendship that you fostered 10 years ago and it's just not there anymore. But yeah, no, you can see he's wholly distracted with everything else that he's got going on in his life. Yeah. You know, namely Yoko and his own vision on things and the stuff that's being written in the newspapers that he's reading and such. And he's got his own vision.
Yeah, it does feel like John is there collaborating at the very least somewhat begrudgingly. He, you know, I'm sure feels an obligation and, you know, is still friends with these people, but I'm sure that energy is there. Like we both talked about having a similar experience where it's like, man, I love these people with all of my heart and I would do anything for them, but these are not the people that I grew up with. So It creates a really, really interesting dynamic. And there is also something to be said about, you know, that tension and that pressure creating a diamond where, you know, if you've got everybody just agreeing and high-fiving each other all the time, like, is that really going to make for the best piece of art? Like,
no,
probably not.
No, and we're talking about Abbey Road, Let It Be, and the White Album. I'm going to lump in there because there was already the existing tension.
Yeah, for sure.
This is all on the heels of the tension off of that album, which it's hard to look at this. I said I'm a Sgt. Pepper guy because that's my nostalgia point, and I appreciate it. Revolver is one of the best albums of all time. Arguably, but like, these last three albums, the real last three albums, not Yellow Submarine as it is, it is that tension and that those difficult times that they're working through, but also their individual growth. Like, these guys persevered through it. They could have just thrown the towels in, and we wouldn't have, because as we touched on earlier on, this documentary rather is not about Let It Be. It's Abbey Road and Let It Be. It's both of them. Like, those are the albums that come out of this whole thing. And both albums, Abbey Road comes out before Let It Be, right?
Yes.
And neither of these could exist. We watch the fact that the end of the Beatles was probably there before these albums were made, and yet they cared enough about each other and about they attempted to keep the band together enough to build these last projects, to like get this last stuff done.
Yeah. And in light of that, I was just going to say, in light of that, it has no right being the absolute pinnacle of pop music that it is.
Sure, except, and maybe this is like an optimist perspective on it, but it maybe is indicative of the amount that they actually, the talent that they had, but the amount that they actually did care about each other.
Absolutely.
Right? Like the fact that, as you put it, the pressure was enough to create a diamond speaks to the amount of ultimate investment that each of these members did put into it, that they all did stay, that you didn't just have a member walk away and stay walked away, that you heard the audio, no video, of that Paul and John conversation where they're like, this is why this is happening, and this is what we need to do, and we need to address this, or this is just over now.
Yep.
They cared enough to do that. They didn't have to.
They did swallow their pride to a certain extent, and have a come to Jesus moment, as they say. I don't know if that's a Texasism, but it is. They really had to self-reflect and make some hard decisions and some changes.
Right. And this goes on beyond the film. I mean, the film ends February 1st, basically, right? And the recording sessions do go on beyond the credits rolling of them coming in the next day. It's not like it's framed as they come in the next day and they just complete everything, but they go on writing and forming stuff to becomes these two albums throughout the next few months. So the band does continue on for a bit. They split after Abbey Road, I think just before Let It Be comes out. But there's one other thing that really stuck out to me that goes along with what we're talking about right now, and it's that point that comes up with right before they do the rooftop performance, and they're having another one of these kind of meetings that seems like they're talking in circles, and I found myself mildly getting frustrated because I'm just like,
it's frustrating.
You guys are just stacking stuff on top of each other that doesn't make any sense. But there's a point that Paul starts making, and you get those like bits of real gut truth that come out as you're talking around something. You can start to pull out things. And he starts talking about how he's frustrated, or he was hoping, or had the vision that he had at least, was that the Beatles didn't have to come together to make another album. It was about a TV show or a film or some kind of, it seems like maybe this grand finale, but it seems like an ending. Like it almost feels like he has this feeling that he knows the Beatles are ending and there should be a grand finale. And they talk about going to Tripoli at one point, right? To that like big amphitheater and whatever. And he keeps kind of coming back to this thing that he didn't want to just come in and make an album, or the vision wasn't like, why do the Beatles always have to come in and make an album? And it seems like he's also at the same time simultaneously maybe coming to the realization that that's what this band is. Like,
that's effectively what John says. He's like, because that's what the Beatles do. We make albums. That's what we do. We make
albums. It's like he has these visions for what the Beatles could be, but it's really what Paul could be. You hear George talking about how he wants to do a solo album. John's got his own stuff. And Ringo's about to do a movie. And Paul is bummed that the Beatles are the Beatles. He's bummed that it's like, this is the cycle that we go in and we make an album. And because of that, to me, the rooftop thing feels very messy. It feels like, and again, I don't know what the overall take in the historical context is of this. Is the rooftop thing viewed as this amazing moment, or is it remembered as the last time they performed together? I'm not familiar enough to know how it's held, but for me, coming in with my own perspective, because that's all I have, it feels like a messy punctuation point that they needed. You hear the director of the documentary, the producers, all talking about how they don't have the end of the story. They have all this content and they don't have the ending. They don't have a culmination point. And it feels like a forced ending or a forced moment that should have been more. Like I do side with Paul in all of this, where it's like, the Beatles deserved more than a bunch of like 2x8s nailed together on a roof ad hoc, on like singing for people and then having the cops show up. Like, there is something very punk rock about it. It's very cool. It's exciting that it happened, and some of the footage is fun, and it's fun that some of the stuff on the album is from that recording session. But it feels like they needed to do something, and they had no other choice, and so they're like, let's go on the roof, this is what we can do. Instead of doing it at some concert hall or in some foreign land or something, they just stick them on the roof and they don't tell anybody about it. I don't know about you. It just, for me, it was frustrating. I'm looking at it from a production standpoint and I'm like, this is sloppy. This doesn't do the band justice. It doesn't put a bow on one of the most important bands of all time. That's their last
certainly
performance.
Doesn't do that, right? It's interesting. I have mixed feelings about it as well. I probably have a little bit more positive feelings about it than you do. I think that it was necessary, but would it have been better for them to do the Tripoli thing or a concert hall, like you said? Like, as much as that would have been probably a more organized, a more grandiose, and a bigger, bookend to the Beatles, would it have been as memorable? So I don't know.
Maybe
not. I don't know the answer to that, but and we won't know the answer to that, but it's what happened. And it seems like many things were with the Beatles. it was a compromise. It was, not all of them wanted to go to Tripoli.
I mean, George didn't even want to go on the roof. And you can tell
No,
he doesn't want to be there.
He literally says he doesn't want to do it. And
you watch him through the whole thing and he's like, he doesn't want to be there. You can tell he doesn't want to be there. Yeah.
So I also would have liked to have seen more. You see a lot of Billy footage inside the studio, but you don't really, he's kind of there in the background and the camera doesn't really focus on him. You can hear him, but not as much as in the studio sessions. And there's certainly not as much camera focus on him. So I would have liked to have seen more of that. And then at the very end of it, because we all know what happens after the fact, is, oh man, I really wish that I could have those cameras in the Abbey Road sessions. I would love to see that level of coverage to capture what happened inside Abbey Road, because, I think as we've discussed, Abbey Road for me is the pinnacle.
Yeah, and I think you're right.
It's probably, it is a shame that there were no other live or, public performances after that. Would it have worked? Who knows? But at that point it was like, they were done. And like you already mentioned, they were done before all this even happened. They were falling apart, within the time frame of the White Album. So
I just think, again, like you go to your sliding doors or your shoulda, woulda, coulda, like if things had been different, if their manager hadn't died or if they had gotten the new management sooner or something, I feel like there was a way. The wheels didn't come off. They almost came off.
Right.
But they didn't come off, and they wound up getting across the line with some, like you said, 2 incredible albums come out of it. But it feels like someone could have crafted something, a better situation than rushing to get on the roof because Ringo's got a movie and George doesn't want to be there. And you see how happy Paul is to be performing, right? Like Paul feeds off of an audience, and John in many ways does too.
He's having fun
John's
too.
excited to be up there.
But Paul is 100% in his element.
Oh God, he's loving it. He's loving it, and George is just like, this is the worst thing ever.
And Ringo's just happy to play.
Yeah, he
just wants to play.
Yeah. I also, Beatles aside, I hope and wish that there is footage of this extent for some other artists. I've watched a few rock docs. I'm not super well versed, but here and there I've watched some, and some of them, there was the Oasis Supersonic documentary was great,
that.
And that was another one where it's like, how did they think to shoot the footage that early, like in their high school band rehearsals? Who was shooting video of that? You have video of your high school band rehearsals? Like, who has that?
No, not that early.
Probably not. Yeah. And so, like, it's amazing that sometimes you have bands that have the presence of mind to do that, but when you have the content, the storytelling, and the end product that you can have, that Peter Jackson was able to do here, I just look at this and I'm like, man, I wish this existed for every album and every band that I love. Like, I would spend a few hours, I don't know about 9 hours, but I would spend a few hours. I would spend a few hours, like, just having a deep dive with a band to sit on as a fly on the wall and just get immersed in what is going on there.
For sure.
So it does kind of make me want to revisit the world of music documentaries and see what else is out there that is similar to this. I don't think there's anything like this, but there are great documentaries out there on artists, and it does make me want to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole on that. Yeah,
and the only thing that comes to mind that would probably be the most similar, even though it's kind of a completely different genre, is the Woodstock movie. simply
Oh my God.
because, it's not scripted really. It's just
Right.
something was happening and they filmed it. And it's kind of a time capsule of an era and a historical thing that happened in popular music, and they just simply captured it. You know what I mean? So definitely not the same context, not focused on one artist. It's not really behind the scenes necessarily, but for some reason I make that connection because it is just, sort of a historical event that's happening and they're filming it. I don't really know of any other individual artists documentaries that are going to be anywhere close to this.
No, I doubt it. Yeah.
It would be like comparing, a made for TV sci-fi movie and trying to compare that to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just not. It's not going to hold up. So this is
and
kind of a pinnacle.
To that end, like to have it be this extensive, I feel like there's probably stuff I missed. I'm probably not going to watch it again. But I might jump back and go back to a few things. There's that moment when you start to hear the nuggets and the bits and pieces of something, and I'm like, oh, I rewinded that like once or twice because I'm like, what's the reception to something? Like when they're talking about the pomegranate and stuff, I'm like, oh, that's fun. But did I? And maybe I missed it, or maybe we both missed it. I didn't hear anything. I didn't hear the genesis of "Come Together." I was waiting for that. I didn't hear anything of "Here Comes the Sun," which I know was written around that time. So there's so many other things that happen, as you said, in those Abbey Road sessions that fleshed out both of these releases. Because there are a bunch of songs from Abbey Road that we hear about,
a bunch
that are part of this. But it's weird that none of that was in there. I guess that some of those iconic songs that define Abbey Road actually happened after the fact. And I would love to see what that was like after they got off the roof and they were like, all right, well, now it's 2 albums and we have enough material for 2 albums. Because there's that one point when they realize that they have 14 songs and they're like,
we do have
we have the album. Oh, we're done. Oh, we did it. So
but there's
I
more
wonder
there.
what the conversation is when they're like, oh no, we have 23 songs or whatever, and now it's 2 albums.
I want to see the creative process putting "Come Together" for sure. I would love that. So unfortunately, we don't have that. There were not camera crews inside of Abbey Road Studios for the duration. So that is unfortunately a missed opportunity. And other than that, final thoughts, favorite moments, and any final words on the massive topic of the Beatles.
Yeah, I mean, on the documentary, it was a great watch. I definitely needed to digest it for a while. I watched it in like maybe like 45-minute intervals here or there. There were great moments. My daughter watched parts of it with me sporadically, and she was like, "Wait, they're going to play on the roof? How are they going to do that?" Like there were these fun little moments where she got engaged. That was fun, and it spurred the conversation where now we're listening to some Beatles music in the house because of the movie, and she's exposed to it. And again, like it is a funny thing. Just as an aside, my wife's maiden name is Lennon. And her dad's name is John. So my father-in-law is John Lennon. And
interesting.
When I found that out, I was just like, oh, my parents are just going to say something stupid. Like I was like the moment they meet him, and I tried to get ahead of it and it didn't work out. And they still say stuff every once in a while. And I'm like, just because he's got the same name, like, what are you going to do? But the Beatles have been with me throughout my entire life. It's a massive subject. We scratched the surface. I don't know if we'll ever go back in, but
I don't think there's unless we're given a reason to, which
yeah, but I think this was a great kind of swath of like being able to dip our toes here and there and dig through some of the dynamic that make this band what it was.
Yeah.
It made me appreciate them in a new way. And I feel like I have new ears I'm putting new ears on songs that I've known forever, and now I'm hearing a little differently because I know some of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes.
For sure. What it makes me excited to do is to kind of get back into the creative mode again, just with life and work and kids and the podcast and the Discord community and everything else that is going on in my life. It's been kind of a long time since I've actually just kind of sat down and created music, and it makes me want to do that. Unfortunately, it kind of, it makes me want to do it without having to collaborate with anybody else because we've seen all of the collaborative issues and, all of the things that went down in the film. But it definitely got my creative side excited. And I hope that someday we can have a look into an artist that maybe right now is completely unknown or at least not as popular as they should be. And their journey is being documented. And then, 30, 40 years from now, we might have this amazing story to watch of this artist or group of artists coming together and overcoming great odds and great interpersonal turmoil to collaborate and create something timeless and historically significant. So that's something to hope for the future. Of course, it's, it seems unlikely, but everything does until it actually happens. So
no, that's true. Yeah.
Well, we did it. We tackled, a topic that I at least questioned whether or not we even had anything to say about, because it's like, what more could we possibly add to this conversation? And in typical retro groove fashion, what it comes down to is, our personal relationship with it and how we interact with the music world and how the music affects us personally. So I'm thrilled to have had the conversation, and I feel like, whenever we have a more introspective conversation like this, we kind of get to know each other a little bit better. Our listeners get to know a little bit more about us, and everybody hopefully has a good time. So at the end of the day, I want to be Ringo. I just want to play.
I hear it.
Well, this was great. And thank you for listening to Retro Groove. We are part of the RetroLogic Network. Check out the website, retrologic.games, for social links, merch, community, and more. Also, don't forget to check out our Instagram account at retrogroove_podcast. And we'll see you next time.
I just farted. I thought you should all know.